That's where I'd move to. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And as Elijah said, we do have amazing speaker today, and I can't wait to hear this conversation that we're going to engage in. And that's what it's going to be today. Not a presentation, but a conversation. So get those fingers ready, because you're going to be keying in questions and comments, and we're looking forward to reading them off. But before we get started, I really have to do this acknowledgement because I feel it, I want to. And I feel honored that my Native brother allowed me to share this with you each and every time we do this gathering. So we honor the land as the Creator intended, in that we commit to keep it clean and support efforts to make it safe for all. We can show honor to the Native keepers of the land by recognizing the value of their culture, by learning the truth of their history and how it shaped this great country. Today we have an interesting topic, and we are going to use an interesting platform in that we will do, it's going to be a lot of question and answers and conversations, and because we want you to engage in this conversation, because it's a different way of engaging our audience. And how I came across this topic, I was reading an article several months ago, and this book title stood out to me, Coming Out as a Dalit. And I thought, what is that? Now, some of you online may have heard this term, and you may have even read the book, but it was new to me. And when something is new to me, I take a deeper dive. And as I did so, I discovered and found the author. And I found her, and we had a conversation, and I asked her to come and share her work with us. And she graciously said yes. And I am excited to share this. So the topic, or the information that drew you here today, the 2,000-year-old social hierarchy known and taught as the caste system was believed to be officially abolished in 1950 throughout India. In present day, the caste system is still imposed on people living in India at birth, defining their place in society, what jobs they can do, and who they can marry. Those at the bottom of the system's hierarchy, who fall outside of the main categories of Brahmins, like priests, teachers, warriors, rulers, traders, merchants, and laborers, who are considered untouchables, or Dalits. The socioeconomic disparities and social prejudices present within this system parallel many of the racial injustices present in the United States. So, a little bit about our speaker. She is a leading anti-caste expert, journalist, and award-winning author of the nonfiction memoir, Coming Out as Dalit, which was recently awarded the Sahitya Akademi Award. I practiced that, which is India's National Academy of Letters Young Warriors Award, which is among the country's highest literary honors, and is currently being taught at several universities across the United States. Her work has been published in the New York Times, Foreign Policy, and The Atlantic. She has also been featured on the BBC, The Guardian, and PBS Newshour. She's graduated from the Columbia Journalism School and lives in New York. She holds a BFA in music theater from the University of Arts and an MFA for the Performance and Interactive Media Arts from Brooklyn College. Please, let's give a warm welcome to Yashica Dutt. Yashica, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that incredible welcome, Fanny. And I love the energy that we have created here today. I'm so excited. Thank you, Elijah, for manning down the fort. I'm really excited to talk about caste. It's a lifelong passion of mine, I can say at this point, and it's a great joy to introduce it to new audiences. I'm really excited to be here today, and I do want to say I moved to New York already, so I am not leaving. So I think the way we can start, and I had a little bit of a plan. I know that we have typically a presentation, but as you graciously allowed me flexibility, I'd love to read a little bit from my book. This is my book coming out as Dalit. It is currently available across the Indian subcontinent, and I'm really hoping to get it available in the US. However, you can still access it on Amazon if you're so interested. So I want to tell you a little bit about caste. And I know some of you are familiar with the term and know how it manifests in India, but I want to take you a little bit back, how it started and how it affects our lives today, and some of the myths around the origin of caste system in India. So this is chapter 2 from the book. It's called The Caste System, How It Began. Caste is an established reality in South Asia and South Asian communities across the world. Indian culture, in its broadest sense, while well known for its vibrancy in many aspects, including food, dance, music, art, also has the hierarchical order of caste and its patriarchal view of women at the center of its core. In the past few decades, ever since Dalits were able to reach out to global communities to discuss their experiences, those belonging to the dominant caste or upper castes have also become more vehement in their attempts to distance Indian or Hindu culture from caste. They posit that the caste system was not truly a part of Hinduism until the arrival of the British in the 1600s, when they created these artificial categories to divide the local population. As plenty of data and research suggests, that is a cover-up for a much deeper and older malaise. Chaturvarna, the system that divides Hindus into 4 unequal castes and pushes Dalits, like myself, who are considered untouchables, outside of that system, was standard practice in the subcontinent of India long before the 17th century. This is not to let the British off the hook. While they in the avatars as the East India Company and later as the British Raj might not have created the caste system, they did formalize these established categories, even creating new ones, using what the sociologist G. Aloysius calls a statistical sleight of hand. They exploited it to ensure that Indians did not come together against them. They pushed the upper castes or the dominant castes into the top of the most power structures in the subcontinent. Aloysius calls them a particularly pragmatic type of imperialists who were careful not to disturb the social order, and this policy stood them well. There are several theories about the origins of the caste system in India. Sociologist and human rights activist Gail Ombet, in her book Dalits in the Democratic Revolution, Dr. Ambedkar and the Dalit Movement in Colonial India, which was published in 1994, Ombet looks at the works of anthropologists such as Gregory Posel, Morton Klaas, and Morton Freed to see how caste groups came about. Starting with pre-Hindu civilizations like Indus Valley, which some of you might know about, she examines tribes or groups of agriculturists, hunters, and fishers who started exchanging surplus goods. Over time, these groups evolved into jatis or castes. However, these jatis existed mainly among the Dravidians, The Dravidians were believed to be the original inhabitants of the Indian subcontinent, since there were no caste-like groups among the Aryans or people who came from Central Asia into India. There is also no indication that caste or caste groups existed among another ancient Mundari tribes from Jharkhand, Assam, Odisha, West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, or Bangladesh. So this is to say that the Dravidians, who were the original inhabitants of the Indian subcontinent, already had caste groups and a prevailing notion of purity and pollution. While the converging of the Aryans, who came from Central Asia into the Indian subcontinent, and Dravidians, who were already there, into one society, the Aryans exaggerated concepts of purity and pollution and used it to maintain their superiority. The division into the four castes of Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra was developed to legitimize the way in which divisions among Aryans were solidifying and indigenous groups were absorbed into a new system. The British understanding of caste was predicated on what is now debunked as the Aryan invasion theory. European Orientalists, the British, who were convinced of their superiority as white men, argued that Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, who are the top three castes of the caste system, were also, on the other hand, descended from the pure and superior Aryans. Dalits and Shudras, on the other hand, were Mool Nivasis, who were the original inhabitants of the Indian subcontinent. The narrative of the Aryan superiority, the people who came from Central Asia, was already popular at the time. European Orientalists used that narrative of Aryan superiority. Some of you might remember it from the Nazi era. The Nazi era, they used it to establish an ethnic kinship between Europeans and the ancient Vedic people and upper caste Indians, who declared themselves equal to the white-skinned conquerors. And some upper caste nationalist leaders of that time also claimed that theory and proved that they were superior over the lower castes of the subcontinent. Aryan or upper caste superiority was then used as the justification for the existence and continuation of the caste system. Social activist and anti-caste reformer Jyotirao Phule challenged this theory in the 1800s by turning it on its head. He denounced the Aryans who came in from Central Asia as invaders who had exploited the rightful inhabitants of the Indian subcontinent, the Dalits and Shudras. More recently, there has been new evidence that indicates that the Indo-European language speakers did not invade, but simply migrated to the subcontinent around 2000 and 1500 BC. This coincides with the composition of the Rig Veda, which is the oldest known Hindu scripture. As religion evolved, Manu, considered the first human by some in the Hindu religion, is believed to have written the Manu Smriti, which was a code of conduct for all Hindus across the land around 1800 years ago. This treatise, the Manu Smriti, delineates the place of everyone in society. As per the Vedic scriptures and the Manu Smriti, which was written 1800 years ago, Dalits were considered pollutants. They lived outside the villages or main residential areas in bastis or varas or ghettos, as we can call them, used separate roads and water bodies, and were denied direct association with the rest of the society. The caste system's unequal ranking that binds people to certain professions appears to have been created to protect the powerful few. The higher castes could avoid hard manual labor, guaranteeing them and their descendants generations of respected positions and the material wealth that follows from that. But for this to work, it was essential for the lower castes and untouchables to fully accept their existence of servile labor and crushing poverty. The concept of karma, paying for the sins of previous lives in subsequent lifetimes, was one of the means for accomplishing that. It convinced those who were born as lower caste that their status as lower caste exploited people was a result of their own actions in their previous lives. Not only did they have to deal with inequality in this life, they also had to contend with the guilt for what they might have done in the previous life. Karmically defiled, the Dalits had to be the ones to take on the most unpleasant, dehumanizing tasks as their daily professions. Their shadows, if cast on an upper caste person, were believed to defile, and they crouched, bent, and prostrated themselves to ensure that others did not get polluted. So that's a little excerpt from my book, Coming Out as Dalit, where I talk about how the caste system started, how it is not originated by the British, but how it was exploited by the British colonizers to rule India effectively while using dominant caste people to put them as middle managers in positions of power to ensure that the country runs smoothly while fanning the fires of social inequality that already existed and solidifying it in many ways into a system that we still see today. I mean, let's not forget, India has only been independent for 75 years, and that's not enough time for a system to disappear on its own. So that's from the book, Coming Out as Dalit. Over to you, Fanny.
Oh, wow. You know, there are some people on the Zoom will understand the comment I'm about to make and some may not. And that is, there's nothing new under the sun. Just when you think that you have a corner market on a practice or a belief, then someone like you come along and said, oh, let's consider this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And wow, thank you. That book sounds really good.
Thank you.
I need to get a copy. So I have some questions, and while others are lining up, and I'm sure, as Elijah have one, he can jump in here, but I have some here that I really want you to respond to. Can you tell us some more about your work in coming out as a Dalit and why you felt the need to write the book? I could begin to feel that as you were sharing some of the from the book, but I felt that there's something else you want to share with us.
Absolutely. And Fanny, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. I feel that I want to start by outlining the parallels between, like you mentioned, racism and how, as Dalits, we survive back in India and even within Indian communities in the United States. So the Dalit movement since Indian independence in 1947 has been extremely active. Our godfather of the movement, which, Isabel Wilkerson called the MLK of our movement, his name is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar was the Dalit man who fought for Dalit equality, who ensured and brought Dalit rights to the table at the time the British were leaving the country. He made sure that we got the equal rights, and not just that, we got affirmative action that would allow us to be in the systems that we were gatekept from in a very formal way. So that movement has been ongoing for hundreds of years. And now in this decade of our time, we see caste evolving into a different kind of beast. The way I describe that in the book is caste has mutated into another form to keep up with the times. You know, if someone were to challenge somebody from the Indian community, they would say, well, caste is something that existed back then. And, you know, I plan to talk about it later on, but just to touch upon that, caste existed back then in a different form. Now it has kept up. It has modernized. It's a new beast. It looks different in different times. And what has happened since the ascent of the Indian story, since the ascent of India as the tech superpower, as the brains of the world, as being extremely successful and on its way to glory, caste has become a forgotten story. It's a story that does not fit this narrative of India on the rise. But at the same time, the casteism is completely well and alive. It is seen within education systems, in schools and universities, within daily lives. It affects how people form relationships, fall in love, get married. But even beyond that, it affects their jobs, their livelihoods, what homes and places they can or cannot enter, whether they can be in places of worship, whether Dalits, some Dalits, you know, we are a part of the Hindu society, but the Hindu society does not treat us as equals. We're not even allowed in places of worship because, like I mentioned in the reading, the concept of purity and pollution is really part of our beings. We are the pollutants, not something we touch, not something that we can wash our hands of. We are the pollutant that might pollute the temple that we enter. And that's why we are restricted from that. So this system, like I'm saying, has evolved into many different shapes and forms. And now, as Dalits have gotten access to education, like for example, you see me sitting here and speaking to you in somewhat decent English, it's because somebody in my family, my grandfather, had access to affirmative action, and he was able to break through these systems that were meant to subjugate us, that were meant to keep us in perpetual slavery, you know. So to, and I'm not saying these words lightly, caste professions that are tied to, you know, what caste we are born in, what family we are born in, is a form of slavery that has been identified, because my caste profession, the family profession that I come from, is manual scavenging. And for those of you who are not aware, manual scavenging is an extremely dehumanizing form of work where you go and clean bathrooms with your own bare hands. And bear in mind, India is still a developing country. We don't have access to toilets everywhere. And it can be, you know, a really unsafe and a dangerous profession. But not only we perform that profession, we become that profession, if that makes sense. That work becomes the identity of who we are. And in order to escape that dehumanizing labor, that dehumanizing label, many of us decide to pass. Many of us decide to hide their identity, hide our identities. Because for some of us, that's the only way to survive. For some of us, there is no other way to live a normal life in a sort of a modern, quote unquote, society if we don't hide our last names. Last names are the biggest markers of caste. So if you are born in your ancestral place, they will be able to recognize what family you're from the Dalit family. But if you move into a city, if you move into an urban area, you can choose to hide who you are. You can pass off as an upper caste person because of the education, with hiding your last name, with changing your entire identity. So the reason I wrote this book, because I wanted to confront this denial of caste that exists in Indian societies today. Many times you will hear a lot of Indians say caste doesn't exist, while knowing very well that that's not the truth. Caste is alive and present. And I wanted to create this book as an argument that would once for all end the denial of caste within Indian societies. I wanted to bring facts and data and statistics because, you know, as Dalits, and I'm sure as, you know, as Black people in America, we know when we talk about our pain, it's invalidated easily. They say, where's the proof? we don't believe you. So as a journalist who had worked in India for a long time before I moved here, I wanted to bring the proof. I wanted to silence this argument that caste is over. So I wrote this book coming out as Dalit because no literature at that time that was modern and capturing the modern reality of caste existed in mainstream popular culture. I do want to preface it by saying academia has always been bursting with these ideas, and movements in other parts of the country have always been around. But popular culture, whether it was television, whether it was media, whether it was journalism, did not have a document where somebody like me who was growing up in a small town could read it and access and defend ourselves when we're being bullied and told that we don't belong in an education institution because I availed affirmative action and therefore I don't have talent. I'm just a diversity hire. I don't have merit. I don't have talent. I shouldn't be here. And I grew up listening to all these barbs, and I did not have language to defend myself. I did not have language to explain. I knew it in my bones that that's not right, and I should be able to say something. But because of the education system in India, which is not giving kids what we need to understand and defend ourselves, especially against caste, I wrote this book for children, for young adults, for everyone to access these ideas and stand up for themselves when somebody tells them that our experiences with caste are wrong, or we are making it up, or it doesn't exist anymore. So I wrote Coming Out as Dalit to shed light on the modern realities of caste, to talk about this new experience of passing, which people lived with, but people never articulated. We did not have the common vocabulary to identify that. Because guess what? Vocabulary is dominated by upper caste people. They dominate media. They dominate, education. They dominate what is being said, what is not being said. So we don't have a word in edgewise. And this book was an attempt to get our word out there. And I do want to say there are wonderful books that exist outside of that. But I feel that this was, on my part, an effort to intervene and confront this system that was just existing and these ideas that were perpetuating from India to the US to the UK, across the world, that India is this monolith where caste is over. And that's why I wrote Coming Out as Dalit.
Whoa. I see some questions popping up in the chat box. Q&A box. Shall I move on, Elijah, or you want to share questions that you have there?
We can share the questions now if you want to.
Okay, and then I have more. Go on, Elijah.
All right, so one we have is, could you share the experience of being Dalit in India? What forces acted on you? How did you react to them? How did they affect you? How did you overcome them?
Thank you. Great question there. Appreciate this. So the forces that act on Dalits in India are very much the forces of inequality and injustice that act upon marginalized people across the world, that act upon Black and Native people in the US, that act upon Aboriginal people in Australia, that act upon, so many other marginalized communities, tribal communities across the world. They're the forces where some people who have acquired power and want to hold on to that power, whether it's white supremacy, whether it's dominant caste power, they don't want to share that. They feel that they have now earned this right to be on the top, and certain other people like ourselves have to be marginalized on the bottom. And an example of that is how caste system perpetuates even today is, like I mentioned with affirmative action, when we are in schools and universities, there is a quota, the word QUOTA, quota is the system that allows Dalit students and tribal students to enter these spaces because they're extremely casteist. Many of them don't believe that Dalits deserve an education. So now in colleges and universities, over the past maybe couple of decades, we've seen this backlash against Dalit students when they enter. And of course, many of them are first generation learners. Many of them have never had access to even a school. Even within schools, we are discriminated. We are asked to sit outside the classroom in certain areas because Dalits cannot pollute the class with their presence. So when a Dalit student, having grown up from that kind of crushing poverty and that kind of debilitating circumstances, when we reach colleges and universities, we're told we don't belong here because other students who've had generations of knowledge and wealth of education are way ahead of us. We just don't match that level, and we are blamed for our own failure. And that is cited as a reason to not include more Dalits within these educational programs and to systemically keep us out. Even today in India, there is an idea that somebody who's born in a lower caste should stick to lower caste professions. You don't want to do manual scavenging? Sure, why don't you pick up garbage then? Maybe that's a better suited profession for you than become an academic or a teacher or a priest. Those options are not available to us. And I will continue to talk more about it because I want to move on to other questions. But there are so many ways that caste manifests in India through food, through education, through access to rentals. When we go to rent a home, our caste is asked. And the way somebody like me, and there are many ways to deal with it, as we know, no society is a monolith. People respond to these pressures in different ways. Some people who are very brave, and I will talk more about this, students, especially in educational universities educational institutions and universities, they are challenging these systems and confronting them head on. People like my parents decide that they don't want their children to go through that risk, to go through that trauma that they've experienced, and they tell us to hide our past. They tell us to pass as an upper caste person. They tell us that we have to learn to be like upper caste people, which is a completely different culture. If you're aware in the US how Black culture, Latino culture, white culture are different, you will know that upper caste culture, dominant caste culture, lower caste culture are different. We have no access how to get to that upper caste dominant culture because they are gate kept. And there are tells. We have to learn the tells. We have to adopt a different identity. And this whole time, we're being told that we are not worthy. So you bear that shame, you bear that humiliation that I am trying to be like somebody else because who I am inherently is not good enough. So it comes with a huge burden, and there are many ways to deal with it. But by passing as an upper caste person is how my family dealt with the trauma of being Dalit.
Oh, that was brilliantly explained. There's a question here that ties in with that. And the question is there any active engagement by those at the higher levels of the caste system to deconstruct the system as a whole?
What do you think? No, I mean, I will answer that question seriously. I think allies are so important. I think allies help us move ahead, but the engagement is not coming from there. The engagement and the burden, as always, falls on marginalized people. We have to speak for ourselves. And if you've been paying attention to what's happening, even in the United States, what's happening around caste, it's not people at the top. It's not the Brahmins or the Kshatriyas who've been in the US since at least 1960s in huge numbers. They've not been sitting here and challenging the systems of caste that they've created within the communities. It's the Dalits who have had to come here and talk about these systems and break these barriers. So the burden falls on us. I would like for people who are at the top of these systems to understand, understanding your privilege has become a passé term, but it's useful to sort of unpack the unearned capital that you have carried for generations just for being born in a certain family. It's really important to unpack that and to recognize your own system. Let's start there. And then we can talk about how do we become allies of the Dalit movement. But to answer your question simply, there is not much engagement from the dominant castes.
Thank you so much, Yashica. There's one more.
Before you read that question, I want to comment to someone's chat, and then you can do that. Elijah, thank you so much. Someone read my mind, honestly, and placed this question or not question, but a comment in the chat box. And it reads like this: so many parallels to the experiences of marginalized people in the United States. That was my exact thought I was having, and someone actually wrote that out because they are. as I listen to you, I mean, me, when I show up, I can't pass. I can't.
Absolutely.
I can't.
Yeah. No way.
However, I had a cousin who could and did. So it's interesting. It is so interesting. I apologize, Elijah. You have a question from?
That's fine. So in the question box, there's something that correlates to that well, because they want to know, is there any major difference between how caste shows up for Indians in America versus to how it shows up in the homeland? And does that, if there is a difference, does it affect the tendency for those members to want to discontinue identifying with the caste system in which they were born?
That is such a great question. And, I was hoping to speak a little bit about that. So I'm really glad this is brought up. Absolutely. There are complete differences in how caste manifests in India, which is the crucible of this whole system, versus how it's showing up in the US. Now, if you think about this in the chapter that I wrote, caste originated in India. It's been there for thousands of years. It's a part of our cultural DNA, our physical DNA. It just exists. It's like water. You cannot deny that. To unpack that only begins with recognizing how caste is showing up. So we are at that level of just now beginning to admit that caste exists. And there was already a movement, like I mentioned, in the 40s, where, Dr. Ambedkar fought for our rights and forced people to acknowledge caste. But in the 75 years since then, people thought that that was all that was needed and it's done and dusted. But now we're seeing a new movement. But at the same time, because of the efforts of Dr. Ambedkar, because of the efforts of so many other Dalits who not just fought against the British for freedom from colonization, but also fought for freedom from upper caste dominance at that time. So they were able to secure protections. They were able to secure laws. Untouchability, like Fanny mentioned in the beginning, was outlawed in India in 1950. It's still a crime. Whether it's practiced culturally or not, legally, there are protections that Dalit people can access. There is more awareness about Dalit rights. There is, we can stand up and say, hey, this is a hate crime, and I can take you to court for doing this to me. Does that always stop that? Absolutely not. There are still extremely violent crimes that happen on a daily basis against Dalit people in India. And I want to share a statistic with you. From 2018 to 2020, crimes against Dalits have increased by 17%. That's a huge number. So for anyone thinking that this is a declining trend, this is not ongoing, this is very much part of our reality. But at the same time, this is an understood and accepted reality. Some people have difficulty acknowledging how everything is related to caste. I talk about in my book how caste is the gear that runs every system in India. There is no ignoring caste, whether it's food, religion, culture, movies, dance, song, whatever you think about India, caste is at the root of it. And that reality is taking some time to manifest. However, in the United States, this is a totally different situation because Indians themselves are a minority community. In the US, when we talk about the dominant castes, those are white folks. That's white supremacy. Those are different systems where Indians themselves are marginalized. But with the history, and like I mentioned a little bit in my reading, the kinship that exists between upper caste people who thought they were Aryans and therefore pretty much, coincided with the Nazis at that time and said, we have superior blood, and white supremacists of that time who believed that that was true, there exists natural allyship. Now we see Indian Americans as the model minority for various reasons. Of course, that cannot be debated. But there are reasons with immigration policy in the US. There are reasons about who's coming to India. They're only choosing, the most cutthroat engineers who've made through various rounds of competitions to come to India, and they're putting them in these heated environments when they're primed to succeed. So that way, Indian American community is a model minority. But at the same time, There are fractions within the Indian American community which are also practicing caste, which are not talking about caste at all, which are, just thinking that they can, because of the numbers that they represent. And, 90% of the current Indian American population is dominant caste. Whereas back home, less than 25% of the Indian population is dominant caste. So you see the disparity about who gets to come to America. And people who get to come to America get to write the story. These are the people who've been here, who've defined the Indian American story as, spirituality, Hinduism, exotic religion, dance, Bollywood, culture, food, all of which is true, but so is caste. And they really forgot that one particular aspect of how caste manifests, while at the same time continuing to discriminate against the Dalits who did exist within these communities, continuing to use the power that they have as an expat community within the United States to wield political decisions back in India. So this is a nefarious complex, and it's showing up in different ways. And let's be very clear, the US has no protections against Dalit people. Now, since 2020, with the Cisco case, which some of you might have heard about in the California court system, now there is an awareness that caste is a thing. But it took so long for that awareness to even take root, which hadn't been talked about before. So the way it's showing up in the US at least, is again in university and college systems. The Indian professors that you see in the US are mostly from dominant castes. So when they do have maybe Dalit students, they end up practicing the same kind of inequity that they've practiced home. The same ideas that Dalit students aren't talented. Dalit students have reported and gone on record to talk about their experience with dominant caste students from Indian communities who've told them that they don't belong here. Who've said that, oh, they're still coming here, mudding the ground again. Why do they have to come to America? Why can't they just stay where they are? So there are different ways in which these two situations and systems are manifesting, but at the root of it, caste remains the same. I hope that answered the question.
Oh,
Thank you so very much.
I'm catching my breath for a moment. Wow. What gave you the courage? What gave you the courage to do what you do?
I don't do anything. This is what I have to do. I mean, sure, on the material aspect of it, I'm a journalist. I use my voice, but really I'm at a safe distance from India. I'm here in the United States where I can seek protection from this direct sun of caste by the shadow that is created by Black people through civil rights movement, because I knew there were ways to fight. I didn't know that back then. Here I came and I learned that there is a way for me to raise my voice. And the most natural solidarities that I've found are with Black women, are with Black queer folks who understand what I'm going through. So I feel the courage that I received to raise my voice while being in the US was seeing how other people were using their voices. I remember this when I was in a class in Colombia, and this was a feminist theory class, and it was filled with diverse groups of people. They were like extremely radical queer people, extremely radical trans people, very vocal and powerful Black women who were just talking about their stories, and watching them really gave me the courage. And this is not a practice answer, Fanny, because I was not expecting this question, but it really is the truth. Because when I saw them and I said, not only are they taking their trauma seriously, because until then, when I'd moved to the US, just, maybe it's been 7 months, I didn't know what I was going through was anything worthy talking about. Because this trauma of passing as an upper caste person, creating a double identity. And I talk about this in my book where I say, it's like carrying the carcass of your old identity in your back, and you drag it across until it fuses with your skin. and you forget it even exists. And it's really traumatic, but I never realized it until I moved here, and I learned from wonderful folks who showed me what it is like to recognize and understand your own trauma. I remember when there was a question posed in class and somebody said, what are your experiences with marginalization, if any? And I wrote about my experience, but I talked about it in a funny way. Like I talked about it like, look at this weird thing that happens in India. Because I had not had access to powerful Dalit movements, because there is a whole shame in India about accessing Dalit movements. Even being an outspoken activist in India can make you a target of scorn. So my parents, being middle class, educated parents, having gone through the trauma of, having seen my grandmother still clean toilets, for a long time in my mother's life. And my mom didn't have to do that, but she didn't want me to be exposed to those ideas either. So they didn't, put us in the path of activism. And I never understood these experiences as serious until I moved to the US in my 20s. And I saw that these were serious experiences. I learned from Black people, honestly. And I've in the book, I talk about what a joy and gift that has been to learn from the education that was created and how we can now use that to empower ourselves. And I feel the courage exists because I feel like I will be supported, and I am. I mean, look at this conversation and the many other conversations that I've had. I feel that there is a community that in some way has my back by having the same experiences and leading the way.
This is another question. And the question is, I hope the answer that you give me will be the one that I hope you're experiencing. Any guilt for being in a space where you can escape?
Oof. Of course. I mean, I'm safe here, right? I'm safe because we know what's happening in India right now. If journalists are being jailed, people have been jailed for months without any medication. People who are octogenarians who've used their voices against the current administration have been put in jail. Some of them have died. India is, in terms of being an authoritarian state, it's in a dangerous place right now. My parents are terrified for me. I've had to modulate how much I use my voice and how visible I can be to the Indian state. And this is a conversation I'm having on Zoom, so I'm terrified even saying this, but it's the truth. I feel that I am safe. And there are so many people back home who are not, who don't have these opportunities that I've had. And I'm, despite everything, there are people who still are forced, or in my family who are forced to be in these professions of manual scavenging. And it's dehumanizing to do that. Like I said, people think you are human excrement, not just you clean it. You are filth, you are dirt, you are pollutant. And I've had the opportunity to escape because lots of therapy and an Ivy League education, which I could not pay for, but I had to constantly beg the university system, and they gave me a full scholarship eventually. But I knew I needed to escape. And there's a ton of guilt. Even now, I feel that I'm not on the ground. I'm on the ground in the US, but I'm not on the ground in India. And I could use my voice, but I'm also having just, gone through the trauma of living with extreme income inequality, living with food scarcity, which I did even in my generation, because we know generational traumas don't break bonds easily, and patriarchy runs in all our families. So my mother had to suffer a lot for being a Dalit woman who wanted to treat her female children equally to her male child, which is a huge gender disparity in our communities. And she had to suffer for that. And we didn't have a ton of money growing up. So I'm reluctant to also put myself through that distress again. So it's like a really difficult choice. And I hope, and for now, and I'm being completely honest with you, Fanny, I feel that I can at least use my voice while being in the US. I feel that there is maybe a little bit of space for somebody like me to talk about what's going on, to be at the forefront of this movement and create awareness, while at the same time hoping that my visa doesn't get canceled anytime I go back to India, hoping that I'm able to come back to the US where my life and my partner is. So those are very real fears. And not just me, a lot of us who are speaking either about caste, who are speaking about Hindu nationalism, who are speaking against the government, are now navigating, negotiating, when can we see our families back in India, if at all? Should we call them to a different country in the Middle East and have a meeting there and maybe not visit India for the meantime? So these are very real fears. And I'm constantly thinking about it. And I'm hoping for a day where caste movement is mainstream in the US very soon, and it's powerful. And then we can use our voices in an effective way, that from a position where we cannot be harmed and forgotten, where if we are harmed, then that harm is talked about, that harm is known. So it's all about building to that place for me personally, and seeing where I can take this while navigating my personal safety.
I want to read this comment, and then I want to respond to that, what you just said myself. The comment is, thank you for sharing your experiences with us. It takes enormous courage to use your voice the way you are.
Thank you.
And the writer goes on to say, I look forward to reading your book soon.
Thank you so much.
I too want to applaud your courage, your bravery. You're stepping forward. I believe you're making a difference.
Thank you.
How can this audience be an ally to your work?
That is such a terrific question. I think you already are. This audience already stands in allyship with the Dalit movement by showing us the way, by raising voices for themselves, by not backing down to white supremacy. This audience is already an ally to all of us by giving us the courage. To people like me, so many Dalits come here and say, wait, here we can speak. We can finally speak, and people will understand what's going on because they've already had an education thanks to the decades of work that Black people and Native people have put in. So that groundwork has been laid, and that allyship already exists, in my opinion. But I think if there are folks who want to take it a step further, maybe understanding that these concepts that come from Indian communities are not so simple, whether it's religion, whether it's spirituality, which are rooted in caste-based beliefs. And it's not, I would like to say this is by design. The way spirituality that comes from India has been packaged to be easily consumed by an American audience. It does not look problematic. Indian Hindus have not hurt anyone, as far as we know. So there is no harm in adopting this new practice, this new form of being closer to the higher being or closer to being yourself. But I would encourage this audience to sort of question that. And of course, spirituality is a really private decision. And at the same token, I would like to say there is a lot of good there. There is a lot of good to be drawn from those concepts, but especially a concept like karma. We need to think about why it was created. Why is it that some people in the past birth are justified and told that they deserve what's happening to them in this life? Karma, in a sense, where it exists during the time that we spend on this planet, is effective. But karma that runs from past birth to next birth, that does not make sense. That is created to keep Dalits subjugated, to keep them quiet, to keep them pacified, and tell them that they deserve the suffering that they're experiencing. It is the gaslighting effort of the century that is only now beginning to be uncovered. And I think as people who are aware, people who are consuming these concepts, it's important for us to confront and challenge them. And also, one way is to sort of think about Indian communities as complicated, as nuanced, as ones that have these differences, as ones that have these graded systems of inequality within them, and to not allow dominant caste people to get away with this conversation that caste doesn't exist. Because, I'm sure after this conversation over here, some of us might want to go and speak to our Indian friends, and the answer will be, that does not exist, or I don't do that, or I was born here, so I don't know anything about it. Well, that is not true. And it's possible that they don't know much about it, but it's because they've been in a privileged situation to not know anything about it. It's like a white person saying, I've never experienced racism. Well, duh, of course you haven't. And they can say, well, I don't know what happens. How does race affect anybody? Well, because you're shielded from that experience. So I would say, it's important to question these systems around us. And again, this is a huge ask. So we should do that only when we're ready. But at the same time, definitely let's unpack these concepts that Indian communities, Indian societies are giving us, especially now. We have an Indian, half Indian vice president in the White House. The Indian community is becoming more powerful. So many CEOs, Google, Microsoft, Twitter, they're all Indian. So let's question these structures of power and let them not silence you by saying this is racist. Because now, as I talked about in my book, and it's happening now, there is a huge pushback to those whole conversation about caste as dismissing it as invalid. What they did to us back in India is now being replicated here. They're saying it doesn't exist. People are making a mountain out of a molehill. Why should we have to talk about this? Let's present only the best foot forward for the Indian community, and attacking anybody who is not Indian when they talk about caste, telling them that they're being racist. It's not racist to speak about injustice. If the marginalized of the people, community of those people are asking you to be on our side, it's not racist. And there's a lot of, I think, especially among white liberal folk, there's this fear that somebody will call us racist. Well, it's not racist, and I can guarantee that. If you talk about the caste system, you are siding with thousands and millions of people who've been marginalized and silenced and erased for a very long time.
Yashica, I can't thank you enough for this very heartfelt and pure and authentic conversation. I know the audience appreciated as much. It was just very enlightening, very engaging, just as you had said to me, don't worry, I've done this hundreds of times. It's just beautiful, it really was. What we try to do is to bring all of New Yorkers, people, wherever you start from, if you're here, you're a New Yorker, and bring the cultures, the understandings, the different experiences to this platform, so we can all see who we're working with, who we're working for, who we're supporting, where our children are coming from. And the whole goal is that we all see each other as a unit, because we are, and to care for each other as such. I just want to thank you so very much. And I send much love your way. And thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Fanny. I so appreciate this. And I do want to say one thing. I have had hundreds of conversations, but I've never had one quite like this. This was completely freewheeling. I really spoke from the heart. There were many questions that I had not thought about before, especially when you asked me where I get the courage from. That was a question I knew in my bones, but I'd never verbalized. So I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that. And it really, this conversation, this webinar speaks to the care and compassion that already exists within our communities for one another, where I feel safe, I feel seen, I feel visible and recognized by you and this audience. And this will forever be one of the most special conversations that I've participated in, because I didn't have to start from scratch. You knew how I felt, and the audience knows how I felt. So this will always be very special to me. And I promise you, I don't say that at the end of every conversation. This was really, really remarkable for me to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and we feel honored. Thank you, and we hope to have you back again.
Absolutely.
from your very busy schedule that you're going to have.
Thank you.
Everybody else who maintained and stayed here with us this entire time, we want to say thank you. We know you could have spent your hour anywhere, but you chose to spend it with us, and for that, we'll be forever grateful. Everybody have a great day. Yashica, please have the best day ever.
Thank you so much. Thank you.